afternoon.
Yes.
Good afternoon to you all. Good afternoon to you all. I am very excited to be here today. I'll be honest. It's always an honor. It's always an honor to be asked to come and speak and to deliver an address like today. And I really appreciate you all for thinking about little old Aaron, getting the Lord's Aaron. I thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Thomas and Jewel and Corbin and George and the individuals who I've met so far. And also I want to say thank you to all of you all for coming. I was expecting all week to receive a phone call from Jewel saying, Aaron, we're going to move this thing to virtual, you know. My son, as you can see, he's in preschool, and last Sunday, this time last week, they moved us to virtual at the last minute for the rest of the week. And I was just expecting it any day to say, to hear you all say, we're going to move this thing virtual. So for those of you all who are here, thank you for being here. I really do appreciate that. This is a very important occasion, and I do humbly appreciative of the opportunity. I also want to simply say thank you to Jeff, and I think it's Jeff and Regina. Jeff and Regina, you know, let me tell you all, my father was a foster child. My father was adopted and sent down. My name should not be Aaron Rollins, to be honest. My name should be Aaron Earl. But my father was adopted from a family who took him in and raised him. And so I have a deep appreciation for foster parents. So thank you all for being great. Keep being great. Keep being you. Keep being you. Keep being you. And of course, to my fraternity brothers, the men of Alpha Phi Alpha, and all of the Divine Nine, it's great to be here. You know, Dr. King was a very complicated man. Dr. King was a very complex individual. He was not all cookie cutter the way the media like to portray Dr. King. You know, as long as Dr. King was talking about civil rights and the injustices going on in the South and the injustices going on, Dr. King was welcomed. He was, for the most part, welcomed across the country. But see, later on in Dr. King's life, he said, you know, that dream I had back in 1963 has become a nightmare. Dr. King was a complicated individual. See, when he stopped talking about civil rights and started talking about human rights and started talking about economic rights, he wasn't as loved the way he was loved by other members. And when he started talking about military and the war, he wasn't the same beloved character that we all know Dr. King. I want you to know Dr. King died a very unpopular man. He died a very unpopular man. And like Dr. King, Sam Cooke did a beautiful rendition. I don't see it right now, but a beautiful rendition of the song. Like Dr. King, Sam Cooke also was complicated. He's also complicated. Sam Cooke was one of those individuals who thought he crossed over. Sam Cooke said, no, now I have white audiences and black audiences at my shows together. And when I'm on stage, I'm liked and loved by everyone. But what happened in Shreveport, Louisiana, Sam Cooke quickly found out he's just another one of them. Once you're on stage, you're no longer the Sam Cooke that we love and praise and sing with. You're just another one of them. And as a result, Sam Cooke went in and it was a commotion at the motel in Shreveport, Louisiana. And it really bothered Sam Cooke. It really bothered Sam Cooke. And that's what made him go on to write this song. That's one of the things that made him go on to write this song. And it's really interesting that he started this song out talking about the river. He said, I was born by the river in a little tent. And oh, it's just like the river I've been running ever since. You see, when he talks about the river is always very important for us because the river is always, it's a moment of serenity. The river is a moment that represents the soul, represents the spirit, represents the history of so many of us. There are two very important rivers in the United States, the Mississippi and the Ohio. Whereas these rivers represent, for some it represents oppression, and for others it represents liberation. Langston Hughes says, I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and as old as the flow of human blood and human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates as when the dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans. And I've seen his muddy bosoms turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. Hughes represents the community of Africans and African Americans, and the rivers become a metaphor for the history, for the spirit, for the wisdom of African Americans. Sam Cooke went on to say, It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die, because I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. You see, Sam Cooke, like Dr. King, both fantasized about dying. The last 18 months or so of Dr. King's life were very, very tumultuous for him. They're very tumultuous. Dr. King was always a jovial individual, but for the end of his life, Dr. King, his jokes weren't even fun. His jokes were gloomy. His friend Andrew Young would say, Dr. King would walk around here and say, Andy, don't you get yourself killed out there, boy. Because if you do, I'm gonna have to preach your eulogy. And he would start going into a sermon and preaching a fake sermon for Andrew Young. And Dr. King was showing some of the most personable things in his sermon. He started telling some of the things that only a good friend would know, as they were joking about Andrew Young's death. Toward the end of his life, Dr. King was severely depressed. He was severely depressed, and he was even advised to go seek a psychiatrist, but decided against going to seek a psychiatrist. Because he knew that J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI were wiretapping everyone that he spoke with. And he knew that everything that he said in those meetings would eventually be a part of the records of the FBI. Right before he died, his mother and his close friends and families knew that he was very close to, he wasn't doing well. His mother tried to get him to step away from the movement, but Dr. King kept going. His children, the day before he went off to go to Memphis, his children said, Daddy, don't go. Daddy, don't go, don't go. They stood in the doorways and tried to get him to stop and not go to Memphis. And he said, no, you all, I have to go, I have to go. His kids went down and jumped on the hood of the car and said, Daddy, don't go to Memphis, don't go to Memphis. And he decided to go anyway. And we all know what happened when he went to Memphis. Sam Cooke went on to say, I go to the movie and I go downtown. But somebody keep telling me don't hang around. So he was talking about segregation during that time period. He was talking about the segregation that was occurring, the fact that they didn't want my children and your children and me or you to sit in the same rooms or to hang out in the same venues. You know, unfortunately, I have to tell you all, segregation is still alive and well. Dr. King said it was segregated hours Sunday morning. I remember applying for a position at SIU Carbondale. I believe that Carbondale, Illinois is roughly about an hour and a half or so away from here. And as I was applying for the position a few years ago, this was 2013 or so, I remember being wowed by the university. They took me to the finest restaurants, and I met with the deans and the provosts and the presidents and the other faculty members. And I remember one conversation that I'll never forget. The African-American faculty member said, I have to be honest with you, I have to tell you the truth. When you're in Carbondale, you're fine. It's okay as long as you stay around Carbondale. But once you leave Carbondale, we have what they call sundown towns. Make sure, if you're ever gonna ride through any of these sundown towns, get gas up, don't go at nighttime. Gas up ahead of time. Don't be in those cities after dark because you aren't welcome. But needless to say, I didn't take the position in Carbondale. I'm from Mississippi. I didn't want to move to another Mississippi. And it's unfortunate. Sam Cooke went on to say, I go to my brother and I say, brother, help me please. But he winds up knocking me down to my knees. In this part of the song, Sam Cooke was talking about the infighting in the civil rights movement. There were always individuals who felt like, I know what's better, I know a better way, I have a better situation, I have a better way of handling civil rights. One of my professors in college, Dr. Quarles, he was one of those professors, he was a law enforcement agent. He would come in class and he would put his 45 Glock out on the desk and let you know, hey, I'm law enforcement and I can do what I want to do. So Mississippi, we're a gun-loving state. And Mississippi, we're a Second Amendment state. Dr. Quarles would come in class and put his gun on the thing. Dr. Quarles was talking one day in class and he said, you know, I will always have a love for Dr. Martin Luther King. I will always love Dr. King. And Dr. Quarles, if you know him, you wouldn't think he would love Martin Luther King. I'll just say, you wouldn't think he was an MLK fan. He said, no, when I was young in law enforcement, one day I was at Tougaloo College. And while at Tougaloo, there was an individual by the name of Stokely Carmichael. And Stokely Carmichael had the whole crowd. It was a packed room. And there were about 6 or 7 of us law enforcement individuals in the room. Stokely Carmichael had the whole crowd wanted to go and jump on the law enforcement individuals. Anyone they saw white, they just wanted to jump on them. And he said, Dr. King followed Stokely Carmichael. He said, I've been in law enforcement all my life. He said, I never thought I was going to die until that day. He said, it was Dr. King saved my life that day. Dr. King followed Stokely Carmichael and told those people, that's not the way we want to go. That's not what we want to do. That's not the path that we want to take moving forward. The second type of individual are those African Americans or those blacks who make it their point, I would say, to keep the other blacks down, to keep the other blacks in their place. See, it came out a few years ago, not long ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 10 at max, that there was African American informants who told the KKK, they told Edgar Ray Killen and the rest of those guys everything that was going on at the black churches. They knew the title of the sermons, they knew who sang what song, they knew who was there and who wasn't there. It was an African American who told the FBI that Michael Schwerner was in the town. They've been looking for Michael Schwerner. They called him Goatee because of his facial hair. They were looking for Michael Schwerner in the 3 civil rights struggles. So the other 2 individuals, Goodman and Cheney, right? They weren't even on the radar. The FBI knew that they were looking for Schwerner. When he came back to town, they were going to do something to him. And it was an African American who felt like it was my responsibility to tell on Goodman and Cheney and Schwerner. You have to watch those individuals. In Mississippi, we got our own saying, you know, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. Ain't kinfolk. Come on. Sam Cooke goes on, Sam Cooke says, oh, there's been times I thought I couldn't last for long, but now I think I'm able to carry on. Dr. King in his last speech in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. King talked about a hypothetical conversation between him and the Almighty. He said, if the Almighty asked me which age would I like to live in, he said, I'd take my mental flight through Egypt. And I'll watch them as they were building the pyramids. I would take my mental flight through Greece, and I would watch Socrates, Aristophanes, Euripides. They sit around the Parthenon and discuss the issues of the day. He said, I would take my mental flight through the early days in this country when the president was grappling with the decision of signing the Emancipation Proclamation because he knew it would drive a wedge in this nation. He said, but Lord, I would turn to the Almighty and say, if you give me just a few minutes, a few moments, in the second half of the 20th century, I'll be satisfied. Why would you be satisfied? He said, I saw this country finally start to live up to what he said it would do with their Declaration of Independence. When we told the rest of the world that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they're endowed, they're created with certain inalienable rights. And among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. He said, I saw this country in the second half of the 20th century finally come to grips and finally start moving toward what we promised America, promised the rest of the world we were going to do when we sent that letter to King George years ago. He said, I saw us in 1954 as we desegregated the schools, desegregated in Brown versus Board of Education. I saw us in 1955 when we went to Brown versus Board of Education 2 and said we want to desegregate with all deliberate speed. I saw us in 64 when we did the Civil Rights Act. I saw us in 65 when we did the Voting Rights Act. He said, this is the time. And I'm happy to be here to witness all of that because this is where we're moving forward. At the end of that speech, he said, like any man, I'd like to live a long life, but longevity has its place. He said, but while I'm here, I just want to do God's will. I just want to do God's will. And so my question is, I personally believe that God's will in 1964, 1968 is the same will in 2022 that'll be the same will in 3022. And what's God's will? God's will is to simply do right, love mercy, and walk humbly with thy God. Do right, love mercy, and walk humbly with thy God. You see, I believe we have a moral obligation to address the ills of the day. And I will be remiss if I didn't tell you the truth. Yes, I have a PhD in public policy and public administration and a master's degree and a bachelor's degree and certificates here and a mediator and all those different things, but that's not really the core of who I am. You see, the core of who I am, it started with my mama. I'm a mama's boy. I'm a mama's boy. Mama raised 8 children on her own. In a very humble, very, very poor. We're very, very poor. And she taught us a few key lessons that have stuck with me for the rest of my life. She taught us, she said, you know what? You're either going to get a degree or be all you can be. And so my oldest sister, Tasha, is doing her PhD in their dissertation right now in computer engineering. My second sister, Daisy, is getting her master's in nursing. I'm the third child. My fourth child, Erica, she's a United States attorney that focuses on domestic terrorism. The next child, Francesca, is doing her PhD right now. The next child below her, Debbie, works for the Pentagon. The next child below her, April, is doing her PhD in engineering. The baby is a boy named Sam. Mama said, you're either going to get a degree in my house, or you'll be all you could be. You see, we didn't have the luxury of being average in her house. She said, you don't have the luxury of being average. We're too poor to be average. You can't break par around here and feel like you're going to do fine. You see, I know what it's like to be poor. You see, I remember going off and going to school. And I didn't miss a day in school because school for some of us was our way we're going to eat. That's how we knew we would eat every day. Because I know what it's like when the refrigerator's bare. So I didn't miss school. Not because I just loved it, because I knew that was my bread and butter. But she also said, but I do remember those times when I would get off the school bus and all the windows were up and the doors were open. Some of you all don't understand that. See, that's how you know when you get off the bus that your lights are cut off. And everyone on your bus knows that your lights are going to be cut off. I remember going to our neighbor's house and saying, with a bucket, hey, if you don't mind, can we get some water? Because our water is cut off. I remember going to the other neighbor and saying, if you don't mind, can I use your tool? We need to use your tool again, because he had the tool and you can turn the water back on when the water company come out and turn the water on. See, I remember those days, I remember those days. But my mama told us, in all of that, I want you to know something, Aaron. Know something, Erica, Francesca, Daisy, Tasha, saying, nobody is better than you. And through all of this, she kept telling us, nobody's better than you. Nobody. They may be richer than you. They may have this, they may have that. Nobody's better than you. And you better believe nobody's better than you. And I believe that to the core of my being. She said that even through the midst of what we had going on. But the most profound thing she said, Aaron, but no, you're not better than anybody else. I always remember, you're not better than anybody else. The next thing she taught us it's okay, and she wanted us to go and question things. She told us to use our interrogative sentences. Go ask who, what, when, why, where. Find out what's going on. And then find out the motive. Don't just ask the questions, but go and find out the answer to those questions. So what are the major questions for the day? I believe the major question for the day can be found or can be explored through education. The fight right now in the Kentucky legislature is on critical race theory. It's a very controversial issue, but it shouldn't be controversial. Let me tell you a little bit about critical race theory very quickly. First of all, critical race theory believes a few things. It contains a few things. One, it contains that race is a social construct. It's artificial, it's made up, it's not real. Man-made race. There's nothing biological about race. This is what critical race theorists believe. However, it also contends that racism is real. It's tangible. And it's ingrained in some of our institutions. It's ingrained in our criminal justice system. It's ingrained in our legal system. It's ingrained in our education system. And it's ingrained in what it does, it benefits some at the detriment of others. So critical race theory, and true critical race theory is always will contend that we're in this fight together. It's not what some are telling you. It's not this reverse racism. It's not reverse discrimination. Critical race theorists acknowledge, they understand that since the inception of this country, there's always been blacks and whites who work together to make the whole America true to what America is supposed to be about. There are abolitionists right up through here in Paducah, Kentucky, right up through here who helped individuals go over the river. There was not a black man or a black woman who taught Frederick Douglass how to read and write. There were whites who helped establish the Underground Railroad. There was John Brown. There was the Freedom Riders. You see, it wasn't illegal for blacks to get on the bus and ride down through the South. It wasn't illegal for whites to get on the bus and ride down through the South. It was illegal for blacks and whites to get on the bus together and ride down through the South. So I always remember, there have always been blacks and whites working together. As a matter of fact, this organization, the NAACP, was founded by both blacks and whites. Amen. So if anybody want to tell you that critical race theory is, don't acknowledge that they have an agenda or a motive that's probably evil. What does critical race theory do? Critical race theory debunks the myths. It debunks the fables about these American heroes. You see, as a child, you learned in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Critical race theory says, stop telling this to our children. Let's be very clear. Don't tell us that Columbus sailed the ocean blue. This is one of the worst terrorists in the history of humankind. This man raped children. This man ordered the beheading of more than thousands of individuals. This man ordered them to dismember bodies. This man is not positive. Other countries are laughing at America because we gave a holiday to a man that's the #1 terrorist, one of the worst terrorists in all of human history. This man killed more people than Hitler. That's what critical race theory is. Critical race theory will tell you, no, George Washington's teeth were not made of wood. Stop telling your kids George Washington's teeth were made of wood. George Washington had oral issues his whole life. Even during the Revolutionary War, George Washington had oral issues. He had individuals sending him things for his mouth his whole time. George Washington's teeth came from a slave. They held that slave down with no anesthesia, pulled teeth from his mouth, used those teeth to help make the teeth for George Washington that we watch as we smile, as he smiled. That's what critical race theory is. It's going back and debunking those myths. Why is it important? Why is it important? It's important because what we've been doing in our country, we've been giving some a false sense of superiority and others a false sense of inferiority. And that's what critical race theory is saying. Let's come in and debunk these myths and have honest and open conversations so that we can move forward as brothers. That's what critical race theory is. And if anyone tell you anything other than that, they are having a hidden agenda. I'm going to tell you 3 key things as I close. 1, change is inevitable. Change is inevitable. Most major religions in the world will contend the same thing. Most major religions understand the ebb and flow of human life. Most major religions understand, what you sow will reap, you'll reap. Some of us understand that when the sun goes down, the moon comes up. The second thing I want to tell you is you have control over your dash. Like, my Sunday school teacher used to tell us, you have control over your dash. I remember my Sunday school days. She said, every obituary and every tombstone, they have 3 things on them. They have a birthday, a death day, and a dash. You don't control your birthday. As a believer, we believe you don't control your death day. But you do have control over what you do in that dash. You control your dash. And the final thing I want to share with you is it's never the wrong time to do the right thing. It's never the wrong time to do the right thing. A year before he died, Dr. King decided to break away from solely talking about civil rights. And he began talking about economic rights. He made probably his most controversial speech in his life on April the 4th of 1967. As he was deciding to make this speech, he knew that he would lose some of his supporters. He knew he had a one-on-one, a personal relationship with President Lyndon B. Johnson. He knew that he was probably getting ready to sever his ties with Lyndon B. Johnson. Because he went up in a church in New York and said, you know what? I can't continue to stay silent while we bomb little brown babies across the globe. In his speech on Vietnam, he said, I can't continue to stay silent while we bomb little brown babies across the globe. The next day, 168 newspapers came out and denounced him. Time magazine called it a demagogic slander. The Washington Post reported he has diminished his usefulness to his cause, to his country, and to his people. The New York Times said, this is a fusing of 2 public problems that are distinct and separate. By drawing them together, Dr. King has done a disservice to both. In doing that, Dr. King knew that he was probably going to lose all supporters. However, he didn't realize and never thought that he would lose his friends and his foes, his friends and allies. Whitney Young of the National Urban League denounced him. Roy Wilkins of the NAACP denounced him. Ralph Bunch denounced him. Jackie Robinson denounced him. Clergymen all around the country refused to allow him to preach in their pulpits after that speech. Dr. King decided to control his dash.
Go away.
And I want to say this as I close. It's not up to the Kentucky legislature. It's not up to the legislative bodies across this country. So you have the power to control your dash. They've always tried to control the knowledge, control what you know, control what you don't know. As Frederick Douglass was learning to read and write, Frederick Douglass, Mrs. All was teaching him. Mr. All came in and said, no, you can't teach a slave to read and write. If you teach a slave to read and write, he's no longer fit to be a slave. Carter G. Woodson said, if you control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about his action. If you make a man think he is justly an outcast, you do not have to order him to the back door. He will go without being told. And if there is no back door, his very nature will demand one. You see, now, moving forward, you all can't claim ignorance. You can't say that you don't know what this critical race theory fight is about. Okay. What you can do is control your dash. You can control from this day forward what you're going to do about it. Are you going to continue to sit on the sidelines and allow individuals to have these conversations without stepping in and saying, no. That's what it's really about. This is what this really is about. I want you to do as my mom told us. She said, Aaron, as you're listening to individuals talk, as you're reading what individuals are saying, start reading with the third eye. Start listening with the third ear. Stop listening to the rhetoric and listen for the motive. Figure out what the agenda is as you hear individuals talk. And pay attention. And if you pay attention, you realize probably more than you ever would have realized by simply listening to them. William Ernest Henley says, out of the night that covers me, black is the pit from pole to pole. I think whatever gods may be for my uncomfortable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not wished nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms, but the horrors of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. I urge you as you move forward, control your dash. You control you. Do right. Love mercy. And walk humbly before your God. God bless you all. Thank you.